Welcome to Resilience Month. Now, Resilience Month is really important for us here at the project because it enables us to share some incredible stories with you guys from the Second World War generation. They faced a huge challenge and the levels of resilience had to rise for them to overcome that. It's really important that we talk about resilience for ourselves as well. We're all born with an element of resilience, but actually resilience comes through hard life experiences. And that's true for the person we're going to talk about today. His name is Douglas Bader. His story is absolutely amazing. And we've got so much love and respect for Douglas Bader that I actually named my dog after him. He was the living embodiment of resilience, and he absolutely summed up the mood of the nation during those dark days in 1940. Adolf Hitler had invaded mainland Europe and he had that under control. It was now a fortress. He was overlooking Britain, that was in his sights, and with Operation Sea Lion he planned to invade. And that's what Britain was faced with, and they had to be resilient. They had a huge challenge to rise to, and in amongst that challenge was Douglas Bader, and his story is incredible. He was defined by his physicality. He was always on the move. He excelled at football, cricket, rugby, and came first in all the races at school. But the problem with Douglas Bader was he couldn't refuse a dare, and at school that got him into all sorts of trouble. And on one day in 1931, that redefined his life. Now, after school, Douglas Bader joined the Royal Air Force and excelled at being a pilot. He was just incredible. He could do things in an aircraft that other pilots could only wish for, and at 21 years old, he was absolutely elite, at the top of his game. He was pushing the boundaries further than ever before, but on the 14th of December 1931, he pushed them too far. So he was asked by some of his friends to show them how good he was in this aircraft, and they asked him to do a manoeuvre so close to the ground that it was outrageous. Initially, Douglas said no, but because of the boy he was, when they asked him again with a hint of a dare, he had to rise to the challenge. Now, he took his time, got in his aircraft. He wasn't feeling great that day anyway, and he started to perform this manoeuvre, which was a slow roll to the ground, but he got it wrong. The wingtip hit the ground, the aircraft went cartwheeling across the airfield, and Douglas Bader was left sitting in the wreckage with his life hanging by a thread. He was rushed to hospital, and the ambulance crew who dropped him off pretty much said to the nurses and the doctors, "We don't think there's a lot of hope for him." And there he was in this really precarious position. Now, Douglas Bader remembers coming to. He had been unconscious, but he was kind of in a lucid consciousness, and he remembers hearing a nurse saying, "Shh, there's a young man dying out there." And Douglas kind of thought to himself, I wonder who they're talking about, and I wonder what happened to them, and I hope they're okay. And then the reality dawned on him that, oh my God, they're talking about me. And from that moment on, Douglas Bader started to fight, and he kept fighting. And this is the start of the resilience tale. He did manage to recover from the crash, but his injuries were so severe that they had to amputate both of his legs. Now, this was a crushing blow to a young man who had been defined by his physicality. Douglas Bader was one of the boys, and that's what he prided himself on. And here he was in the hospital, a double amputee. Now, the amazing thing about Douglas Bader's story is acceptance, which is something we can all learn from. In time, Douglas Bader was able to accept the fact that, do you know what? I can't change what's happened, but I can be defined by how I act now and what I do in the future. And we can all learn from that. I know that there's things I've done in my life that I regret. I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't have done that. But I also know that I can be defined by what I do going forward. And Douglas Bader was amazing at doing this. So he got to work, and he worked with the team, and they made a special pair of tin legs for him. And he was left with a quite daunting task of learning to walk on these new legs. Now, can you imagine how challenging that would have been and how much resilience played its part? He fell time and time again, yet he got up time and time again. He suffered awful chafing and irritation to the stumps of his legs, but that didn't stop him. And before long, Douglas Bader was up on his feet again. And beyond that, he was able to walk again. And he didn't stop there. He kept pushing, he kept learning, he stayed in touch with his levels of resilience, and he became an incredible golfer, believe it or not, and he was amazing at squash. But there was one last thing yet to achieve, and that was to rejoin the Royal Air Force. Now, he petitioned and tried to get back in, but they said as much as they were privileged to see his progress, they couldn't let in a legless airman. It was just crazy at that moment in time. But when the Second World War broke out, Douglas Bader saw an opportunity. He knew that they were looking for experienced pilots, and he had that experience. So he used his contacts, made some calls, and was given the opportunity to prove that he could fly. Now, Douglas Bader sat in this aircraft. It was a two-seater, just in case anything went wrong. He put his tin legs on the rudder bar and realized that, man, they feel exactly how they've always felt. Nothing's changed here. And he was able to do rolls, aerobatics, and fly it as if he'd never been away. This man was back. And like I said at the start of the video, he needed to be back because the nation had a huge challenge. And here was a man, the living embodiment of resilience. He knew what to do. The average age of a Battle of Britain pilot was just 20 years old. And here was Douglas Bader in his 30s, super experienced, and he actually became an incredible leader. Now, because he had had his accident and lost his legs, it actually made him a better pilot. It saved his life on a number of occasions as well. There was one battle where he crash landed his Spitfire and the instrument panel caved in and trapped his legs. Bader was trapped in the Spitfire as it had caught fire until he realised that all he had to do was unclip his legs, shimmy out the aircraft, be taken back, put on a spare pair of legs, be put in a spare Spitfire, and he was up living to fight another day. When you're in a dogfight, your body is subjected to huge G's as you're performing these life or death turns in combat. Now, Douglas Bader, because the blood had less distance to circulate around his body, his G-force threshold was so much better and so superior to any other pilot in the battle. This meant that he could turn and turn and turn and outfox his opponent. He really was an incredible pilot and an incredible leader of men. Now, as the Battle of Britain raged on, Douglas Bader played a pivotal role, although he was a very divisive character. But in 1941, the Royal Air Force in Britain went on the offensive. We didn't wait to be attacked again. This time we took the attack to Germany. And it was whilst flying over France that eventually Douglas Bader was shot down and taken prisoner. Now, when he was shot down, as he was trying to bail out, both of his legs got caught in his aircraft and he had to bail out without them. And when he was captured, the German army knew exactly who they had. They'd heard all about this legless wing commander and they were so pleased with themselves. But they hadn't quite bargained for the resilience of Douglas Bader. He hadn't quite given up yet. So he said to the Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, "What harm could it do if you got a spare pair of legs flown over for me?" They were like, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Well, you know, think about it. Well, I'm a harmless man. I'm here. I'm in captivity." And he talked them into getting a spare pair of tin legs flown over. So in the next air raid that was heading over towards France, as the bombs were falling, within that raid there was a canister attached to a parachute, and within that canister were 2 spare legs for Douglas Bader, and he was reunited with his tin legs. Can you believe it? What do you think the first thing he did was that night when he had his new legs on? Yes, he escaped. Douglas Bader tied all the bed sheets together of the hospital ward that he'd been staying in. He climbed out the window, shimmied down the rope 3 stories high and ran off into the night. And the German Air Force were furious. They could not believe what he had done. Eventually he was captured again, he escaped again, and he was thrown into a place called Colditz Castle, which was where all the soldiers and airmen who couldn't be controlled, that's where they had to be put. He was such a force of nature, he was really incredible. But what really inspires us here is his levels of resilience. Like, how on earth was he able to get through and overcome those challenges? Well, initially he accepted it and then he never gave up. Like Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. And that's exactly what Douglas Bader did. He's such an iconic person. I have to be honest, he divides opinion because what came out of his single-mindedness was a man who was doggedly determined. And if you were on the wrong side of that, then you could form a very different opinion. But for me, Douglas Bader was an amazing person and I see him as a role model. And he did sum up the mood of the nation through those dark days in 1940.